The Siege of Alesia, 52 BC. Julius Caesar, Vercingetorix, and the Double Ring of Fire. In the summer of 52 BC, the ultimate fate of Gaul hung in a delicate, treacherous balance. Julius Caesar, a general whose political ambitions in Rome depended entirely upon the absolute subjugation of the Gallic tribes, faced a newly unified enemy. For years, the Romans had exploited internal tribal rivalries, pitting chieftain against chieftain to conquer Gaul piece by piece. However, Vercingetorix, a brilliant young chieftain of the Arverni, accomplished what many Roman senators deemed impossible. He forged a grand coalition of fiercely independent, historically hostile Gallic tribes. Recognizing that direct field engagements against the iron discipline of the Roman legions were suicidal, Vercingetorix adopted a brutal scorched earth strategy. He burned thousands of crops, destroyed hamlets, and systematically starved Roman supply lines, forcing Caesar to fight on an empty stomach in hostile, unfamiliar territory. The psychological strain on the Roman legions was immense. Supplies were nearly depleted, and morale wavered as news arrived that tribal uprisings were erupting across every corner of Gaul. After a series of indecisive and bloody skirmishes, Vercingetorix made a crucial strategic maneuver. He withdrew his massive army, numbering around 80,000 warrior infantry and elite cavalry, to the hill fort of Alesia. Situated atop a formidable plateau surrounded by steep river valleys and impassable ravines, Alesia was considered virtually impregnable to any direct assault. Caesar, commanding roughly 50,000 battle-tested legionaries alongside veteran Germanic auxiliary cavalry, quickly surveyed the terrain and recognized that a direct frontal charge up the steep, rocky slopes would result in the utter annihilation of his forces. Instead, he made a cold, calculated decision that would become a legendary masterclass in military engineering and siegecraft. He would lock the Gauls on their mountain and starve them into absolute submission. Caesar ordered his legionaries to construct an elaborate, double line of fortifications that remains one of the greatest feats of military architecture in ancient history. The inner wall, known as the Line of Circumvallation, stretched for 11 continuous miles directly around the base of the hill fort of Alesia. It was designed to completely seal Vercingetorix and his 80,000 men inside, cutting off all access to forage and water. This wall featured deep trenches, some filled with diverted river water to create artificial moats, a heavily reinforced wooden palisade with watchtowers spaced every 80 feet, and a lethal array of concealed traps. Roman troops dug spurs, hidden pits embedded with sharp wooden stakes, barbed iron hooks, and covered pit traps known as lilies, to impale and mutilate any Gallic warriors who attempted a desperate night breakout. Yet, the danger to the Romans was twofold. Knowing that Vercingetorix had dispatched swift horsemen through the lines before the siege wall was completed to summon a colossal Gallic relief army from across the entire continent, Caesar took an unprecedented, radical step. He ordered his men to turn around and construct a second, outward-facing ring of fortifications, the Line of Contravallation. Stretching over 13 miles in circumference, this outer ring was built specifically to protect the Roman besiegers from being overwhelmed by the incoming external relief force. The Roman army was now locked in a claustrophobic, terrifying sandwich, besieging Vercingetorix on the inside, while preparing to be besieged themselves from the outside. Weeks turned into months, and conditions within Alesia degraded into unutterable horror. As grain stores dwindled to absolute zero, horses and pack animals were slaughtered for meat. Desperation seized the defenders. Vercingetorix made the heart-wrenching, agonizing decision to expel all non-combatants, women, children, and the elderly, from the fortress to conserve precious food for his fighting men. They surged toward the Roman lines, weeping and begging for mercy. However, Caesar, adhering to unyielding psychological warfare, refused to allow these civilians through the Roman lines. Trapped in no man's land between the Roman palisades and the locked wooden gates of their own city, hundreds of innocent civilians perished from exposure and agonizing starvation in full view of both armies. In late September, the long-awaited Gallic relief force finally arrived on the horizon. A massive horde, estimated by ancient sources at over 200,000 warriors, poured into the valley surrounding the outer Roman ring, their war horns echoing off the mountains. For 3 agonizing days, the ultimate battle raged across 2 fronts simultaneously. Gallic warriors hurled themselves against the outer Roman palisades with terrifying fury, while Vercingetorix launched desperate, coordinated sallies from inside Alesia against the inner walls. Roman legionaries, stretched to their absolute physical and mental limits, fought back-to-back, swapping exhausted cohorts into the front line under relentless showers of spears, rocks, and arrows. The crisis reached its absolute zenith on the 3rd day of continuous combat. Gallic forces discovered a crucial structural weakness in the outer wall at the foot of a northern hill where a Roman camp could not be fully fortified due to terrain constraints. Tens of thousands of Gallic warriors surged down the slope, breaching the Roman outer defenses and threatening to annihilate the camp. Sensing imminent collapse, Caesar personally intervened. Donning his distinctive crimson cloak so his men could easily identify him amidst the chaotic smoke and dust, Caesar led his personal reserve cohorts and cavalry directly into the bloody breach. The sudden appearance of the red-cloaked general ignited a massive surge of adrenaline and morale among the exhausted Romans. Caesar sent his Germanic cavalry around the flank of the outer Gallic force, striking them suddenly in the rear. Terrified of complete encirclement, the Gallic relief force shattered and fled in total panic. Seeing their relief army slaughtered and scattered across the surrounding hills, the defenders inside Alesia lost all hope. The following day, Vercingetorix rode out of the fortress gates in magnificent armor, circled Caesar's seated podium, threw down his weapons at the conqueror's feet, and surrendered. The conquest of Gaul was complete, clearing Caesar's path toward absolute power in Rome. The Battle of Munda, 45 BC. Caesar's final battle and the clash of iron wills. Following the assassination of Pompey the Great in Egypt and the complete destruction of Republican opposition at the Battle of Thapsus in North Africa, Julius Caesar believed his bloody civil war was finally drawing to a close. However, the shattered embers of the Republican faction found explosive new life in the far western province of Hispania, modern-day Spain. Led by Pompey's formidable sons, Gnaeus and Sextus Pompey, along with Caesar's former chief lieutenant turned bitter enemy, Titus Labienus, a massive anti-Caesarian army gathered. Recruiter levies, veteran legionaries who had deserted Caesar, and local Spanish auxiliaries flocked to the Pompeian banner, assembling an intimidating army of 13 full legions. Caesar rushed to Hispania in late 46 BC, forced to fight one final, brutal campaign to secure his dictatorship and stabilize the Republic. Unlike previous battles characterized by clever maneuverability and diplomatic overtures, the campaign in Hispania quickly degraded into a bitter, merciless war of attrition. The Pompeian forces, well aware of Caesar's tactical brilliance in open-field battles, refused to engage on equal ground. Instead, they fortified strategic hilltops, raided Caesar's supply lines, and forced the dictator to maneuver across extremely rugged terrain during harsh winter weather conditions. On March 17, 45 BC, the two armies finally confronted each other on the plains of Munda, near modern-day Andalusia. The Pompeian army of approximately 70,000 men took up an exceptionally strong defensive position atop a wide, steeply sloping hill. At the base of the hill ran a treacherous, muddy stream surrounded by marshland. Caesar, commanding around 40,000 battle-hardened veterans, including his beloved, legendary 10th Legion, hoped the enemy would march down the slope to engage in open combat. Gnaeus Pompey, however, stubbornly held his ground, forcing Caesar to make a dangerous tactical choice: attack uphill across open, muddy ground under a hail of missiles, or retreat and face strategic humiliation. Caesar chose to attack. As the Caesarian cohorts crossed the stream and surged up the slope, they were met by a devastating volley of javelins and a terrifying wall of shields. The battle quickly descended into a brutal, face-to-face melee. Unlike previous engagements where tactical flanks or clever maneuvers decided the outcome, Munda became a horrifying slaughter of pure muscle, iron, and desperation. Many of the soldiers on both sides were veteran legionaries who had fought side by side for years. There was no room for mercy, no quarter asked, and neither side was willing to yield an inch of ground. For hours under the scorching Spanish sun, the lines remained completely deadlocked. The metallic clashing of swords and the screams of the dying echoed across the valley. As physical fatigue set in, the weight of the larger Pompeian army began to slowly push the Caesarian left wing backward. For the first and only time in his legendary career, Caesar felt the cold touch of impending defeat. Seeing his men begin to waver and step backward, Caesar grabbed a shield and helmet from a wounded legionary, ran to the very front of the fighting line, and shouted to his fleeing men, "Are you going to surrender your general to these boys?" Shamed by their commander's extreme bravery and exposed personal danger, the veterans of the 10th Legion rallied with fierce determination. Pushing forward on the right flank, the 10th Legion began forcing the Pompeian left wing back. To reinforce his struggling flank, Gnaeus Pompey ordered a legion from his right wing to shift across the battle line. Sensing this minor movement, Caesar's ally, King Bogud of Mauritania, launched a surprise cavalry charge against the now weakened Pompeian rear and right camp. Titus Labienus, observing the Mauritanian cavalry threat, detached several cohorts from the main line to intercept them. However, to the exhausted Pompeian infantry in the front lines, it appeared that Labienus was retreating from the field. Panic instantly rippled through the Pompeian ranks like wildfire. The subtle shift turned into a total rout as Caesar's legions pressed their advantage, breaking the enemy line completely and driving them down the hill. The retreat quickly turned into a brutal massacre. Over 30,000 Pompeian soldiers lost their lives on the field of Munda, including Titus Labienus and Gnaeus Pompey, who was hunted down and executed shortly after. Caesar's casualties were relatively light in comparison, but the psychological toll was immense. As Caesar later reflected to his close associates, he had often fought for victory, but at Munda, he had fought for his very life. Returning to Rome, Caesar stood as the undisputed, absolute master of the Roman world. The Battle of Actium, 31 BC. The naval clash that gave birth to the Roman Empire. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC did not restore the Roman Republic. Instead, it plunged the Mediterranean world into a decade of horrific civil strife. Out of the chaos emerged the Second Triumvirate, dominated by two men with incompatible ambitions: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and political mastermind, and Mark Antony, Caesar's brilliant senior general. While Octavian consolidated his power over the western provinces and the city of Rome, Antony aligned himself with Cleopatra VII, the wealthy and charismatic queen of Ptolemaic Egypt, establishing a base of power in the rich Hellenistic East. By 32 BC, the political rupture was absolute. Octavian conducted a masterclass in propaganda, framing the impending conflict not as another bloody Roman civil war, but as a righteous holy war against an Oriental queen who sought to enslave Rome. When Antony publicly declared his children by Cleopatra as heirs to Roman eastern territories, the Roman Senate revoked Antony's authority and officially declared war on Cleopatra. The stage was set for a titanic confrontation to decide who would rule the known world. In the summer of 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra assembled a vast military force at the naval base of Actium, situated on the western coast of Greece along the Ionian Sea. Their fleet comprised over 500 warships, including gigantic Hellenistic quinquiremes and octaremes equipped with massive wooden armor, catapults, and towering battle towers. In addition, their land army numbered over 70,000 legionaries. However, Octavian's brilliant admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, executed a devastating preliminary campaign. Agrippa seized key naval ports along the Greek coast, cutting off Antony's supply lines from Egypt and trapping his fleet inside the Gulf of Ambracia. As summer wore on, disease, hunger, and desertion crippled Antony's camp. Supplies were completely exhausted, and several key Roman senators abandoned Antony to join Octavian. Realizing that staying at Actium meant slow starvation, Antony and Cleopatra made a desperate strategic decision. They would use their heavy fleet to break through Agrippa's naval blockade and escape back to Egypt. On September 2nd, 31 BC, under a clear blue sky, the battle began. Antony's massive wooden leviathans sailed out of the narrow straits into the open ocean, forming a defensive battle line. Agrippa, commanding Octavian's fleet of approximately 400 ships, held his distance. Agrippa's vessels were smaller, faster Liburnian galleys manned by highly trained crews. Agrippa deliberately refused to engage Antony's heavily armored ships head-on, using his superior mobility to swarm around the massive vessels, snapping their oars with ramming maneuvers and raining down flaming arrows and artillery projectiles. For hours, the battle was a bloody stalemate. Antony's heavy ships were too formidable to be rammed easily, while Agrippa's nimble galleys easily evaded the slow cat-like pounces of the Egyptian warships. However, around mid-afternoon, a favorable afternoon breeze began to blow toward the south. Cleopatra, commanding her flagship and 60 gold-adorned royal Egyptian galleys at the rear of the battle line, saw an opening. Hoisting her purple sails, she broke away from the main engagement and forged a path through the gap in the center of the line, heading directly for the open sea. Seeing Cleopatra's squadron flee, Antony suffered a total psychological breakdown. Leaving his men, his flagship, and the bulk of his fleet fighting in the heat of battle, he boarded a small, fast galley and chased after Cleopatra, leaving his army behind. The sight of their commander abandoning them shattered the morale of the remaining forces. Many ships surrendered on the spot, while others were burned or captured by Agrippa's triumphant forces. The naval victory at Actium was total and decisive. Within days, Antony's abandoned land army surrendered without firing a shot. Octavian pursued the fleeing lovers to Alexandria in 30 BC. Realizing all hope was lost, Mark Antony fell upon his own sword, and Cleopatra ended her life via poisonous snakebite to avoid being paraded through Rome in chains. With Egypt annexed into the Roman realm and all rivals eliminated, Octavian became the sole ruler of Rome. 3 years later, the Senate granted him the title of Augustus, marking the end of the Roman Republic and the official dawn of the Roman Empire. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, AD 9. The Germanic ambush that halted the expansion of Rome. At the dawn of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was at the absolute apex of its military glory. Under Emperor Augustus, Roman legions had pushed deep beyond the Rhine River, establishing military camps, building infrastructure, and asserting authority over the wild, forested lands of Germania. Augustus envisioned transforming these vast territories into a permanent province named Germania Magna. To accomplish this, he appointed Publius Quinctilius Varus, a high-ranking aristocrat and experienced administrator, as governor of the new territory. Varus arrived in Germania assuming that the indigenous tribes were thoroughly subdued. He treated the Germanic people not as formidable warriors, but as defeated subjects, demanding heavy taxes and imposing Roman legal codes that deeply offended local customs. Unbeknownst to Varus, a devastating conspiracy was fermenting beneath the surface. The mastermind behind the plot was Arminius, a young chieftain of the Cherusei tribe. Arminius was an officer in the Roman auxiliary cavalry, held Roman citizenship, and was a trusted advisor to Varus himself. While dining at Varus's table, Arminius was secretly organizing a massive, multi-tribal alliance aimed at complete Roman extermination. In the autumn of AD 9, Varus was leading 3 elite legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, along with 6 auxiliary cohorts and 3 cavalry squadrons, totaling over 20,000 men, back toward winter quarters near the Rhine. Along with the soldiers marched thousands of civilian camp followers, women, children, and supply wagons. While en route, Arminius brought news of a fabricated native uprising deep in unfamiliar territory, advising Varus to take a minor detour through the dense wilderness to crush the rebellion. Ignoring explicit warnings from Segestes, another Germanic noble who hated Arminius and warned Varus of the betrayal, the governor walked straight into the trap. Arminius left the Roman column under the pretext of assembling native auxiliary troops to assist. Instead, he mobilized his hidden Germanic alliance. Arminius led the unsuspecting Roman column directly into the narrow track of the Teutoburg Forest, a treacherous, swampy landscape of impenetrable oak trees, dense undergrowth, and constant, torrential rain. As the 3-mile-long column stretched thin through the muddy track, the Roman legionaries were forced to drop their tight combat formations. Axemen struggled to clear trees, and heavy supply wagons became hopelessly mired in deep mud. Suddenly, terrifying war cries echoed through the dense canopy. Tens of thousands of Germanic warriors, wielding long spears and heavy axes, surged down from the forested hills, attacking the strung-out column simultaneously along its entire length. The Romans were trapped in a horrifying nightmare. The narrow, muddy path rendered traditional Roman tactics and infantry maneuvers impossible. Heavy leather shields were soaked and waterlogged, making them too heavy to hold, while bowstrings were rendered useless by the relentless rainstorm. For 3 agonizing days, the Romans fought a desperate battle of survival while attempting to march towards safety. The Germanic warriors, intimately familiar with the terrain, launched repeated hit-and-run attacks, vanishing into the fog and dense foliage before the Romans could organize a counterattack. On the final day, the shattered remnants of the Roman force reached a narrow bottleneck at the foot of Caukries Hill, pinched between a treacherous bog and a steep wooded ridge. Here, Arminius had constructed an earthen wall to completely block the path. Desperate legionaries tried to storm the wall, but were repeatedly repulsed and slaughtered. Realizing that total defeat was inevitable and refusing to be captured alive, Varus fell upon his own sword. Seeing their commander dead, panic consumed the remaining troops. Officers killed themselves, and thousands of legionaries were cut down where they stood. The defeat was an absolute catastrophe for Rome. 3 full legions were completely wiped off the face of the earth, their eagle standards captured and carried into the dark wilderness. When news reached Rome, Emperor Augustus was so deeply devastated that he tore his clothes, allowed his hair and beard to grow long for months, and reportedly banged his head against palace walls, crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome abandoned its dream of conquering Germania, establishing the Rhine River as the permanent northern border of the empire for centuries to come. The Dacian Wars, AD 101–102 and 105–106. Trajan's conquest of the Carpathian fortress. At the end of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire faced its most sophisticated and dangerous northern neighbor, the Kingdom of Dacia, situated in modern-day Romania. Unlike the decentralized tribes of Germania, the Dacians possessed a unified state, advanced metallurgical capabilities, and vast gold and silver reserves hidden within the rugged Carpathian Mountains. Under their brilliant and ambitious king Decebalus, Dacia had inflicted humiliating military defeats on Rome during the reign of Emperor Domitian, forcing Rome to pay an embarrassing annual tribute to maintain peace. In AD 98, Trajan ascended to the imperial throne. A supreme military commander loved by the legions, Trajan was determined to eliminate the Dacian threat once and for all, restore Roman honor, and fill the depleted imperial treasury with Dacian gold. In AD 101, Trajan launched his first Dacian campaign, assembling an unprecedented strike force of over 100,000 troops, including elite legions, Praetorian guards, and specialized auxiliaries. Trajan's engineers constructed a massive pontoon bridge across the treacherous Danube River, allowing the Roman war machine to pour into Dacian territory. The campaign was defined by brutal mountain warfare, assault on fortified mountain fortresses, and extreme engineering achievements. At the Battle of Tapi in AD 101, Roman legionaries clashed violently with Dacian warriors wielding the terrifying falx, a two-handed curved sword capable of splitting Roman helmets and cleaving shields in two. Trajan was forced to modify Roman army equipment, issuing reinforced helmet crests and limb armor to protect his men. Despite ferocious Dacian resistance, Trajan pushed deep into the Carpathians, besieging and capturing several key fortresses. Realizing he was facing defeat, Decebalus sued for peace in AD 102, agreeing to harsh Roman terms, including dismantling his fortifications and surrendering his siege weaponry. However, the peace was merely a tactical pause. Decebalus immediately began rebuilding his fortresses, raising fresh armies, and attacking neighboring Roman allies. Outraged by this treachery, Trajan launched his second campaign in AD 105. To secure permanent supply access into Dacia, Trajan commissioned his genius chief engineer, Apollodorus of Damascus, to build Trajan's Bridge, a colossal wooden and stone arch bridge across the Danube over 3,700 feet long. It remained the longest arch bridge in the world for over a millennium, demonstrating Rome's terrifying ability to conquer nature itself. In AD 106, Roman legions converged on the Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa Regia, nestled high in the Carpathian Hills. After a bitter and bloody siege, Roman engineers cut the city's underground water supply pipes, forcing the defenders to set fire to their own capital before fleeing into the mountains. Trajan's forces hunted down the remaining Dacian resistance. King Decebalus, cornered by Roman auxiliary cavalry led by Tiberius Claudius Maximus, chose to slit his own throat with a curved dagger rather than be captured and paraded through Rome. The conquest of Dacia was complete, and its consequences transformed the Roman Empire. Trajan captured an immense treasure hoard hidden beneath a mountain riverbed, over 165 tons of pure gold and 330 tons of silver. This colossal wealth funded massive public infrastructure projects across Italy, including Trajan's Forum, Trajan's Market, and the magnificent 125-foot Trajan's Column in Rome, which stands to this day depicting the story of the Dacian Wars in carved marble relief. Under Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its absolute territorial zenith. The Battle of Cannae, 216 BC, Hannibal's masterpiece of encirclement. During the Second Punic War, the Roman Republic faced the most terrifying external threat in its history, Hannibal Barca of Carthage. In 218 BC, Hannibal performed the impossible, leading an army of Carthaginian veterans, Iberian infantry, Numidian cavalry, and war elephants across the snow-covered Alps into northern Italy. In rapid succession, Hannibal crushed Roman armies at the river Trebia and Lake Trasimene, leaving Rome in a state of sheer panic. Determined to end the Carthaginian threat through overwhelming brute force, the Roman Senate authorized the largest field army Rome had ever assembled. Led by the newly elected co-consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, 8 Roman legions along with allied forces were mobilized, totaling over 80,000 heavy infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Their goal was simple: march into southern Italy, locate Hannibal's smaller force of 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, and grind them into dust through sheer numerical weight. On August 2, 216 BC, the two armies deployed along the dusty plains of Cannae near the Aufidus River in Apulia. Consular command alternated daily between the two consuls. On this day, the aggressive and headstrong Varro was in supreme command. Varro deployed his massive infantry block in an unusually deep, tightly packed formation, intending to smash through the Carthaginian center like a colossal battering ram. Hannibal, anticipating Varro's crude brute force strategy, devised a tactical array that remains one of the greatest tactical masterpieces in military history. Hannibal placed his weakest troops, his Spanish and Gallic infantry, in the center of his battle line, while positioning his elite African veteran infantry on the left and right flanks. Crucially, Hannibal intentionally bowed his central line outward toward the Roman army, forming an inverted crescent shape. As the battle began, the massive Roman infantry column marched forward and slammed into the Carthaginian center. Just as Hannibal planned, the weak Spanish and Gallic center began to slowly yield under the immense pressure. However, instead of breaking, the central line conducted a disciplined, fighting retreat, slowly bending inward. The convex crescent gradually transformed into a concave curve. Driven by the sensation of imminent victory, the dense Roman infantry pushed deeper and deeper into the retreating pocket, oblivious to the trap closing around them. While the infantry wrestled in the center, Hannibal's superior heavy cavalry under Hasdrubal routed the Roman cavalry on both flanks. Once the Roman horsemen were driven from the field, Hasdrubal swept around the rear of the entire Roman army. Simultaneously, Hannibal's elite African heavy infantry, stationed on the stationary ends of the crescent, wheeled inward to press against the exposed left and right sides of the packed Roman mass. The trap was sprung. Hasdrubal's cavalry smashed into the Roman rear, completely closing the circle of death. Over 80,000 Roman legionaries were now compressed into an agonizingly tight pocket. The encirclement was so dense that thousands of soldiers could not draw their swords or lift their shields. Claustrophobia and terror seized the Roman ranks as Carthaginian troops pressed in from all 360 degrees. What followed was not a battle, but a continuous 6-hour slaughter. Carthaginian soldiers walked along the outer perimeter of the trapped mass, methodical, striking down helpless Romans line by line. By sunset, over 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on the dusty plain, including Consul Paulus, 80 senators, and dozens of high-ranking commanders. Cannae was the single deadliest day of combat in Western military history prior to the invention of firearms, standing as the eternal definition of the double envelopment tactic. The Siege of Syracuse, 214 to 212 BC. Roman grit against the genius of Archimedes. While Hannibal was ravaging the Italian peninsula during the Second Punic War, another critical front erupted on the strategic island of Sicily. The ancient, wealthy coastal city-state of Syracuse had long been an ally of Rome. However, following the tragic news of Rome's catastrophic defeat at Cannae, the young King Hieronymus of Syracuse broke the treaty and aligned his city with Carthage, opening a dangerous southern threat to Roman supply lines. Recognizing that losing control of Sicily would isolate Italy completely, the Roman Senate dispatched Marcus Claudius Marcellus, a fiercely aggressive veteran known as the Sword of Rome, to retake the city. In 214 BC, Marcellus arrived outside the walls of Syracuse with 4 legions and a formidable fleet of 60 massive quinquiremes. Marcellus planned a rapid, coordinated land and sea assault to break into the city before Carthaginian reinforcements could arrive. However, the Romans had not accounted for a single human mind, Archimedes. The legendary 70-year-old mathematician, physicist, and engineer was a native of Syracuse. King Hiero II had previously commissioned Archimedes to construct advanced defensive war engines to protect the city's sea and land walls. When Marcellus's war fleet approached the sea walls of Syracuse, carrying tall wooden siege towers mounted on joined ships, known as sambuci, Archimedes unveiled his nightmare arsenal. As Roman ships pulled close to the sea walls, Archimedes launched massive catapults and ballistae that fired stone boulders weighing over 500 pounds, smashing Roman ships to splinters before they could reach the shore. For vessels that managed to pull under the sea walls, Archimedes deployed the legendary Claw of Archimedes, giant crane-like mechanical beams extending over the battlements, armed with heavy iron grapples. The claws hooked into the bows of Roman ships, lifted them completely out of the water, and dropped them back into the sea, capsizing them instantly. Ancient historians like Polybius and Plutarch also record that Archimedes utilized an array of polished bronze shields and mirrors to concentrate sunbeams onto the sails of approaching Roman vessels, setting them ablaze from a distance. The terror among Roman soldiers was so absolute that whenever a rope or beam appeared over the walls of Syracuse, legionaries fled in panic, believing Archimedes was about to unleash a new magical engine of destruction. Realizing a direct assault was impossible, Marcellus abandoned the siege towers and settled into a prolonged land and sea blockade. The blockade dragged on for over 2 grueling years. The turning point finally arrived in the spring of 212 BC during a night of revelry within the city. Marcellus learned through deserters that the citizens of Syracuse were celebrating an annual festival dedicated to the goddess Artemis, indulging heavily in unmixed wine. Noticing a neglected, undermanned tower along the northern perimeter, a small elite team of Roman legionaries scaled the wall under cover of darkness. The Roman squad eliminated the intoxicated guards, opened the city gates, and allowed Marcellus's legions to pour into the outer districts of Syracuse. Fighting raged through the streets for days as Roman legionaries systematically captured the city's vast quarters. The magnificent city was ruthlessly sacked and looted by Roman troops hungry for plunder after 2 years of frustrating siege. During the chaotic sack of the city, a Roman legionary stumbled upon Archimedes, who was engrossed in drawing mathematical geometric diagrams in the dirt. Unaware of the soldier, Archimedes reportedly told the man not to disturb his circles. The enraged Roman soldier drew his sword and struck the great genius down, despite explicit orders from Marcellus that Archimedes was to be captured alive and treated with honor. The fall of Syracuse re-established absolute Roman dominance over Sicily, securing vital grain lines, and denying Hannibal a crucial naval base. The Siege of Carthage, 149 to 146 BC. The total annihilation of Rome's great rival. By the mid-2nd century BC, Carthage was no longer a major imperial power. Stripped of its overseas empire, navy, and military independence following its defeat in the Second Punic War, the African city had rebuilt itself into an immensely wealthy commercial hub. However, its economic success reignited intense envy and deep paranoia within the Roman Senate. Arch-conservative Senator Marcus Porcius Cato ended every single speech in the Senate, regardless of the topic, with his famous, unyielding ultimatum: Catrum censeo Carthaginem esse delendum. Furthermore, I advise that Carthage must be destroyed. Exploiting a technical violation of the 201 BC peace treaty, wherein Carthage defended its borders against aggressive raids by Rome's ally, King Massinissa of Numidia, the Roman Senate declared the Third Punic War in 149 BC. Rome issued series of escalating, impossible demands to Carthage: surrender all weapons, hand over royal hostages, and finally, abandon the ancient coastal city of Carthage altogether and rebuild 10 miles inland. Realizing that Rome intended their total destruction, the Carthaginians refused, locked their gates, and prepared for a fight to the death. The city of Carthage was a formidable military fortress. Situated on a defensible peninsula, it was protected by towering, multi-layered stone walls over 40 feet high and 30 feet thick, equipped with stables for war elephants and barracks for 24,000 soldiers. Inside the walls, the entire population mobilized for war. Temples were turned into armories, women cut off their hair to weave bowstrings, and workshops produced hundreds of shields, swords, and catapult projectiles daily. For 2 years, Roman armies under inept commanders failed to breach the formidable defenses. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the Roman people elected Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, as consul for 147 BC, despite him technically being underage for the position. Scipio immediately restored strict military discipline among the demoralized legions and instituted an absolute, airtight blockade. Scipio constructed a massive earthen harbor mole that completely blocked Carthage's access to the sea, cutting off all remaining grain ships. In response, the Carthaginians dug an incredible secret canal from their inner harbor to the sea, building a fleet of 50 new warships from wooden debris in total secrecy. When the new Carthaginian fleet emerged from the canal, the Romans were caught completely off guard, but Scipio's disciplined fleet managed to repulse them in a hard-fought naval engagement. In the spring of 146 BC, starvation had reduced the city's population to walking skeletons. Scipio ordered the final assault, breaching the harbor walls and entering the city. What followed was 6 agonizing days of horrific urban warfare. Carthaginian citizens fought for every house, room, and roof. Roman soldiers had to clear 6-story apartment blocks house by house, throwing defenders from upper balconies into the narrow streets below. Finally, on the 7th day, the remaining 50,000 survivors huddled within the citadel of Byrsa surrendered. Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian commander, begged Scipio for his life, while Hasdrubal's wife, cursing her husband's cowardice, threw herself and her young children into the roaring flames of the burning temple of Eshmun. Scipio ordered Carthage to be systematically burned to the ground. The siege ended 7 centuries of Punic civilization. The city burned for 17 days until it was reduced to piles of ash and rubble. The surviving citizens were sold into complete slavery. The territory was annexed into the new Roman province of Africa, and a solemn curse was pronounced over the land. Rome stood as the absolute, unquestioned master of the Western world. The Battle of Zama, 202 BC. Scipio Africanus versus Hannibal Barca. For over 14 years following his legendary victory at Cannae, Hannibal Barca had marched up and down the Italian peninsula, undefeated in major battle, devitalizing the Roman countryside and inflicting over 300,000 casualties on Roman armies. Yet, despite his brilliant tactical victories, Hannibal lacked the siege engines and strategic resources necessary to break the unyielding political wall of the Roman Confederation. The stalemate was broken by Publius Cornelius Scipio, a brilliant young Roman general who had survived the slaughter of Cannae as a junior officer. Scipio recognized that to defeat Hannibal, Rome had to stop fighting him in Italy and instead strike at Carthage's home territory. After conducting a masterclass campaign in Hispania that completely stripped Carthage of its richest province, Scipio returned to Rome, was elected consul, and raised a bold expeditionary force to invade North Africa in 204 BC. Scipio's invasion was wildly successful. He smashed Carthaginian home armies and forged a vital alliance with Massinissa, a prince of the elite Numidian cavalry. Terrified for their survival, the Carthaginian Senate sent frantic orders to Italy recalling Hannibal. With a heavy heart, Hannibal abandoned his 16-year campaign in Italy and returned to defend his homeland. On October 19, 202 BC, the two greatest military commanders of the ancient world finally met face-to-face on the open plains of Zama, south of Carthage. Prior to the battle, Hannibal and Scipio met in person between their armies for a historic peace conference. Hannibal, older and weary from decades of endless war, urged Scipio to accept peace terms. Scipio, confident in his army and demanding total submission, refused. Battle was inevitable. Hannibal deployed an army of 40,000 men, featuring 80 war elephants at the very front of his line, the largest elephant force he had ever fielded. Behind the elephants, Hannibal arranged his infantry in 3 distinct lines: raw mercenary infantry in front, newly raised Carthaginian militia in the middle, and his battle-hardened Italian veterans in the rear reserve. Scipio deployed roughly 35,000 men, but for the first time in the war, the Romans held the clear advantage in cavalry thanks to Massinissa's Numidians. Hannibal opened the battle by launching his 80 war elephants in a roaring charge toward the Roman line. Scipio, anticipating this tactic, introduced a revolutionary innovation in Roman deployment. Instead of forming the traditional checkerboard, quincunx, pattern, Scipio arranged his cohorts with open, straight lanes running straight through his infantry lines. When the elephants charged, Scipio's men blew loud brass trumpets and horns, scaring several elephants into panicking and trampling Hannibal's own cavalry. The remaining elephants charged down the open lanes between the Roman cohorts, receiving javelin strikes from both sides without damaging the main Roman infantry formation. With the elephant threat completely neutralized, Scipio's superior cavalry under Massinissa routed the Carthaginian cavalry on the flanks, chasing them off the field. The main infantry lines then collided in a furious, blood-soaked engagement. The battle hung in an even balance as Hannibal's veterans held the line against Scipio's disciplined legionaries. The crisis was decided when Massinissa's Numidian cavalry returned from their pursuit and slammed directly into the rear of Hannibal's army. The Carthaginian line shattered under the double attack. Over 20,000 Carthaginians fell on the field, while Hannibal narrowly escaped back to Carthage. Scipio's triumph earned him the grand title Africanus, and Carthage was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty, ending the Second Punic War and establishing Rome's dominance over the entire Mediterranean. The Battle of Pydna, 168 BC. The Roman legion defeats the Macedonian phalanx. For over a century following the conquests of Alexander the Great, the military world was dominated by the terrifying Macedonian phalanx. This battle formation consisted of tightly packed infantry wielding the sarissa, a massive, 18 to 20 foot long wooden pike. Arrayed in 16 dense rows, the phalanx formed an impenetrable wall of iron spearheads that had swept across Asia and dominated Mediterranean battlefields. However, as the rising power of Rome expanded eastward into Greece, a debate emerged. Which war machine was superior, the rigid Macedonian phalanx or the flexible Roman legion? The question reached its ultimate climax during the Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BC. King Perseus of Macedon, seeking to restore the legendary empire of his ancestors, gathered a massive army to challenge Roman influence in Greece. In response, the Roman Senate dispatched Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a stern, deeply experienced 60-year-old consul, to take command of the Roman legions. On June 22, 168 BC, the two armies confronted each other near the coastal city of Pydna in northern Greece. Perseus commanded approximately 44,000 troops, including 21,000 heavy phalangites. Paulus fielded an army of nearly 38,000 men, consisting of 2 Roman legions, Italian allies, and war elephants. The battle began spontaneously during the late afternoon when a runaway Roman pack mule broke loose into the stream, separating the 2 armies, triggering a localized skirmish that rapidly escalated into a full-scale battle. King Perseus quickly deployed his massive phalanx and ordered a general advance across the river. Paulus, watching from a nearby hill, later admitted that the sight of the dense Macedonian wall of pikes advancing with synchronized precision filled him with terror and awe. As the phalanx slammed into the Roman front lines, the legionaries were completely unable to reach the enemy soldiers. Their swords and short javelins, pila, could not penetrate the forest of 20-foot pikes extending far beyond the Macedonian front line. The Roman front ranks were pushed back, suffering heavy casualties as they tried desperately to hack through the wooden spear shafts. However, as the Macedonian phalanx advanced over rough, uneven terrain at the base of the hills, minor gaps began to open in its rigid line. Paulus, possessing the sharp eye of a master tactician, immediately spotted these tiny fractures. He ordered his legionary maniples to split up into small, agile combat units and charged directly into the emerging gaps in the Macedonian wall of spears. This maneuver turned the tide of history. Once inside the long range of the Sarissa, the Macedonian phalangites were completely defenseless. Their heavy, clumsy pikes were useless in close-quarters combat, and their short side swords and tiny shields were no match for the heavy Roman gladius, short sword, and large oval scutum, shield. Roman legionaries slaughtered the trapped phalangites from the side and rear. In less than an hour, the famed Macedonian phalanx collapsed into utter chaos. Over 20,000 Macedonian soldiers were killed, and King Perseus fled the field, only to be captured shortly after by Roman forces. The victory at Pydna shattered the Antigonid kingdom of Macedon forever. Greece was stripped of its independence, and the Mediterranean world recognized a profound reality. The era of Alexander's phalanx was officially over, and the era of the Roman legion had arrived.